What if I told you every empire, from Rome to Britain to the United States, ends the same way? Not with an invasion, not with fire, but with a printer. Every civilization begins with real wealth, metal, labor, trade, discipline. Then power grows, armies expand. The government promises everything to everyone. And when reality can't keep up with ambition, the empire discovers its most dangerous weapon, the ability to create money out of nothing. That's the final illusion before every collapse. Rome. The first warning at its peak, Rome's silver denarius was trusted from the deserts of Arabia to the hills of Britain. It was pure, stable, sacred. But war after war drained the treasury. To pay the soldiers, emperors began diluting the silver with cheaper metals. Each new coin looked the same, but bought less. Prices soared, confidence vanished, and merchants began demanding gold instead of Rome's silver lies. By the 3rd century, the denarius was nearly worthless. Bread riots erupted. Soldiers mutinied. Provinces broke away. The empire didn't collapse overnight. It melted, one coin at a time. Rome died not from invasion, but from inflation. The British experiment 17 centuries later, Britain repeated the same mistake. To finance endless wars with France, it borrowed and printed until its pound was no longer gold but paper. The British Empire built railways, colonies, and factories, all powered by debt. It looked rich, but the wealth was borrowed from the future. When America rose after World War II, the pound fell. History's balance sheet had been cleared again. The American illusion: the United States inherited the crown and repeated the pattern. In 1944, the Bretton Woods system made the dollar as good as gold. But by the late 1960s, Washington was spending more than it produced. Vietnam, social programs, moon landings, all financed by printed promises. Foreign governments started demanding gold in exchange for their dollars. And in 1971, Nixon slammed the door, ending the gold standard. For the first time, money had no anchor. It became pure faith. And faith, once broken, cannot be restored. The empire of debt, today that faith is fading. America owes over $34 trillion, a number so large it has lost meaning. The government borrows $1 million every few seconds. The Federal Reserve prints it. The Treasury spends it. And the public pretends it's normal. Every dollar is born as debt. Every stimulus weakens the foundation. It's the same story told in a modern language of spreadsheets and screens. This is how empires die in the 21st century, not with swords and fire, but with debt and denial. The psychology of collapse: people think printing money creates prosperity. It doesn't. It creates dependence. When citizens stop producing and start waiting for printed miracles, the social contract breaks. Inflation isn't just higher prices. It has the loss of trust between people and their money. Once that trust disappears, no empire can buy it back. The stages of decline: every empire follows the same economic path. Creation, wealth built through work and production. Expansion, power spreads, spending grows. Corruption, easy money replaces discipline. Inflation, paper wealth hides real decay. Collapse, faith in money dies, and with it, the empire. America is deep in stage 4. It still looks powerful. The markets rise, technology booms, optimism lives on. But underneath, the foundation is hollow. Because the currency of empire is not gold or paper, it's trust. And once trust is gone, no printing press can bring it back. The inevitable lesson: every empire believes it's different. Rome had its armies, Britain had its navy, America has its dollar, but none could escape the math. You can print money. You can't print value. You can borrow time. You can't borrow history. The end always comes quietly, first as denial, then as panic, then as silence. And when the silence arrives, the empire is already gone. Every empire reaches a moment when money stops being a tool and becomes a drug. At first, it brings comfort, it fuels armies, buys loyalty, calms unrest. But like any addiction, the dose must rise to have the same effect. And that's when power starts printing its own illusion. The birth of fake wealth: real wealth is created through labor, innovation, and trade. Fake wealth is created through credit, speculation, and promises. Empires always begin with the first and die with the second. When nations discover the convenience of printing, they no longer need productivity, only confidence. They replace gold with belief, sweat with slogans, and savings with subsidies. The illusion becomes addictive because it works for a while. Money floods the system. Stocks rise, assets inflate. The people feel richer, even as their future is quietly sold. The mirage of prosperity in the 1980s and 1990s, America mastered this illusion. It replaced factories with finance, steel with speculation, production with paper. The service economy was born, an empire that produced debt instead of goods. The Federal Reserve became the new Caesar, deciding who prospers and who falls. Interest rates replaced swords. Stimulus replaced conquest. The illusion of endless growth became a religion. And when crises hit 2000, 2008, 2020, the solution was always the same. Print, borrow, inflate. Each time, the empire survived, but only by consuming more of itself. Each rescue weakened the foundation further. Because every printed dollar is a loan from the future, and one day, the future collects. The power of illusion printing doesn't just create money, it creates obedience. When people believe the state can always save them, they stop questioning its lies. They trade freedom for comfort and comfort for dependence. Empires don't collapse when people get angry. They collapse when people stop caring. The illusion becomes the new reality, screens filled with green numbers. Markets booming on debt, governments promising everything. It feels like wealth. It looks like wealth. But it isn't wealth. It's a mirage built on credit and confidence. And both are running out. The turning point. In 2020, America printed $6 trillion in less than 2 years. More money than in its first 2 centuries combined. It was called a rescue. In truth, it was a confession. The empire had lost control. Inflation surged. The middle class shrank. The poor grew poorer. And for the first time in generations, Americans began to realize their prosperity was built on sand. The government printed money to solve debt, and created more debt. It printed to restore growth, and inflated prices. It printed to calm fear, and fueled more of it. That's how illusions end, slowly, then suddenly. The return of reality. The more you print, the more reality pushes back. Prices climb. Currencies weaken. Foreign nations diversify. And eventually, the illusion meets its final enemy, truth. The truth that money can't replace value. That you can't borrow faith. That no nation can counterfeit time. History is clear. Rome debased its silver. France printed its assignats. Germany drowned in marks. And now America is doing the same, just with computers instead of coins. The calm before the fall empires rarely see the end coming. They mistake inflation for growth, arrogance for strength, and compliance for stability. But beneath the surface, every chart, every graph, every statistic tells the same story. Too much money chasing too few real things. The illusion of wealth has turned into a trap. To stop printing is to crash. To keep printing is to collapse. That's why the end is inevitable, because the empire is now addicted to its own deception. The real question isn't if the illusion ends, it's what comes after. Because when an empire finally realizes that its power was never in its money, but in the world's belief in that money, it faces the most terrifying truth of all. You can print dollars. You can't print trust. And when trust dies, so does the illusion of empire. Empires do not die in war. They die in disbelief. The moment a nation's money is no longer trusted, not abroad, not at home, the fall has already begun. The death of trust. For centuries, the world trusted the US dollar as the foundation of stability. It was the language of trade, the store of value, the symbol of power. But that trust was built on an unspoken pact. That America would remain responsible, disciplined, and honest. Now that pact is broken. The signs are everywhere. Nations are trading in local currencies. Central banks are buying gold instead of treasuries. All lies whisper about alternatives. And even American citizens, for the first time, are beginning to doubt the very system that shaped their lives. A currency is not just paper, it's a mirror. And what the world now sees in that mirror is fear. The faith economy unravels. Money has no value by itself. It's a story we tell one another. A story of productivity, of trust, of tomorrow. But when that story stops making sense, when citizens feel poorer while the government claims growth, faith collapses. Inflation is not just a number, it's the measure of lost belief. Every rise in price is a quiet confession that the empire's word means less than yesterday. And every new printed dollar is a prayer that no one will notice. But people always notice eventually. They notice when rent doubles, when savings vanish, when promises fail. And that's when the illusion of wealth turns into anger. The panic phase, no empire ever admits it's collapsing. The leaders call it temporary, the economists call it cyclical, the people call it normal, but history calls it by its real name, the end. At first, money moves quietly, from banks to gold, from dollars to assets, from trust to fear. Then the silence breaks, confidence vanishes overnight. Foreign investors dump bonds. Markets convulse. The empire that once ruled the world's finance becomes the world's warning. The same politicians who said, "It can't happen here," begin printing even faster, trying to save a house already on fire. But the more they print, the faster the flames spread. Because at this stage, the currency itself becomes the enemy. The collapse of illusion. In every historical collapse, there's a moment when people stop asking, "How much is this worth?" That's when faith turns to fiction. And when an empire loses its financial soul, it loses everything else. Its culture, its unity, its purpose. Look around. The world is not rebelling against America's military. It's rebelling against its money. The lesson of history: Rome tried to print loyalty. Britain tried to print relevance. America is trying to print time, but time doesn't come from machines. It comes from trust, and that's gone. Empires fall the same way they rise, slowly, then all at once. They build monuments with gold and graves with paper. They trade discipline for desire, and the printing press becomes their final emperor. This is the last stage, when faith itself becomes fiction, when the story of money collapses under its own lies, and when a new world begins writing its own version of truth. After the illusion, but collapse is not chaos, it's correction. When illusions die, reality returns. When fake wealth disappears, real value reemerges. And maybe that's what history demands, not destruction, but renewal. The fall of the dollar won't be the end of the world. It will be the end of pretending. Because no empire, no nation, no generation can escape this law. You can fake prosperity, but you can't fake truth. And when money becomes faith and faith becomes fiction, that's when history presses reset.